Okay. My topic is the education level, interpersonal contact, and stigma of mental illness and their relationship to college students. There has been a stigma surrounding mental illness and those who seek help for their mental illness in the United States. According to Brown and Badley, 25% of approximately 50 million Americans who experience mental illness will not seek treatment due to the stigma surrounding mental illness. Stigma can come from a variety of different people and places. According to Sanders, Thompson et al., 2004, those who have a mental illness report stigmatization from not only family members in their communities and organizations, but also from the places and people they went to for help. Stigmatization can also be derived from the media in the United States. Wall and Mason studied how the media portrayed mental illness. Dangerousness was associated with mental illness numerous times, and approximately 25% of the 300 articles chosen associated mental illness with crime. The results were found to be consistent with other similar studies conducted. Graham et al. Believe that there are 4 causes of stigmatization associated with mental illness. First, stigmatizing ideas in general cause the public to create negative concepts. These negative concepts harbor stereotypes because those with a stigma are seen as being different. Third, negative concepts also create fear of those who are being stigmatized. Finally, if one person says something negative about an individual, then others tend to agree or go along or conform with this negative attitude, which leads to the generalization that all individuals with a stigma are alike. There are many consequences of the stigma often associated with mental illness. These consequences include the spread of further stigmatization, public fear of mental illness, less community care provided for the mentally ill, and discrimination against the mentally ill. According to Graham et al., other consequences of stigmatization are prejudice, ageism, misconceptions about mental illness, creation of more negative stereotypes, negative professional attitudes, and negative attitudes from the general public. There are also consequences to be considered. When others are stigmatized, Wall and Mason discover persons with negative views of mental illness impact those with mental illness by leading to less recovery for those who are stigmatized and less funding for treatment of mental illness. Due to stigmatization, people with mental illness often attempt to hide their mental illnesses from others. The elderly have an increased risk of suffering the consequences of stigmatization. Old age can be seen as adding to the stigmatization of those who are already stigmatized by a mental illness, because mental illnesses such as dementia, depression, delirium, psychosis, and anxiety are more common in old age. Of great importance in studying the prevalence of stigmatization of mental illness is the impact of attitudes. Attitudes can explain in what ways people feel the mentally ill differ from people who are not mentally ill. Porter and Penn discovered that most people surveyed see individuals who have a severe mental illness as being dangerous and unpredictable and lacking the capacity for improvement. Degnan and Waring predicted that the perception of stigma led to negative evaluations, which were also associated with negative social comparisons. Negative attitudes can lead to discrimination, which also plays a role in stigmatization of the mentally ill. According to Courtier and Penn, 70% of the 1,301 survey respondents with a severe mental illness indicated that they were treated worse when people knew of their mental health history, and many were ignored by the general public because of it. An individual's perception of the mentally ill can often create fear and nervousness when he or she is actually confronted with a person with mental illness. Blaskovich et al. Believe that those with stigmas cause others around them to feel awkward, uncomfortable, and afraid. People experience greater threat with those individuals who are stigmatized than those people who are not stigmatized. In order to understand why people have such attitudes of the mentally ill, there must be an explanation of how the general public explains mental illness. According to Reed and Hooray, their questionnaire research led to the conclusions that people without mental illness explain the cause of mental patients' illness as being psychosocial rather than biological or genetic. Those participants who viewed mental illness from a biological and genetic perspective held more negative attitudes toward the mentally ill than those who viewed the cause of mental illness from a psychosocial perspective. As noted earlier, negative attitudes greatly contribute to stigma and there are several methods that are currently used to reduce negative attitudes in order to reduce stigma. According to Korcher and Penn, there are 3 methods used to reduce stigma in mental health. The first method is protest, which involves directly approaching people and telling them to not have negative stereotypes about severe mental illness. However, this method has not had a significant effect on the beliefs that were held. The second method is through the use of education, but providing the public with information about severe mental illness has also had limited success. The third and most promising method, however, involves direct contact with stigmatized individuals. When involved in cooperative and positive contact situations, more positive attitudes towards severe mental illness seem to form. According to Shore and Sykes, who also believe that Shore and Sykes also believe that active involvement and exposure to stigmatized individuals is the most valuable method. Education can be a powerful way in reducing the stigma of mental illness. For example, according to Stewart, an anti-stigma education program can be effective. The educational program used for her study was completed at 8 different high schools in Canada, and it focused on educating the children on schizophrenia. However, its effectiveness was limited. Stewart concluded that this educational program should be viewed as a smaller component of a larger anti-stigma project, one that consists of many lessons in order to be more effective. Other researchers have different recommendations about decreasing stigmatization. For example, Graham et al. Suggested education, government policies, non-government organizations, professional help from families of stigmatized individuals, a greater understanding from the general public, media cooperation, and increased education and cooperation in schools in order to reduce stigma. Another factor that thought to have an impact in reducing stigma is causal beliefs. There are 3 different types of causal beliefs: biological or biogenetic, psychosocial, and psychological. Biogenetic causal beliefs hold that mental illness is caused by something pertaining to the brain or body, such as a chemical imbalance. Psychosocial causal beliefs are more based on the principle that mental illness is caused by the individual or his or her situation. And psychological causal beliefs focus more on how individuals process information, how they react to stress. According to Lamb et al., psychological causal beliefs create less stigmatizing ideas than biological causal beliefs. The purpose of the current study is to see if there is a relationship among interpersonal contact between stigmatized and non-stigmatized individuals, college education, causal beliefs, and negative attitudes toward mental illness in college students. It relates to reducing stigma because there will be comparisons made among these factors to see which variables are more strongly correlated with the least amount of stigmatizing ideas or stigmatizing attitudes. This study will be based on that developed by Reed and Hooray. Their research questionnaire was the most practical in incorporating the importance of interpersonal contact, but it will be modified for the current study to include education because of education's inconsistency and effectiveness across studies. The current study adds to Reed and Hooray's because it will be including the importance of education that may involve shaping one's attitudes toward mental illness. This information is important in further determining whether contact education or different causal beliefs are related to having fewer stigmatizing attitudes toward the mentally ill. Okay, there are 5 hypotheses for this study. First, there will be a positive correlation with biogenetic causal beliefs and negative attitudes. According to research done by Reed and Hooray, participants who viewed the cause of mental illness as being biogenetic were associated with having more negative attitudes towards those individuals with mental illness. Second, the amount of contact one has with a person or persons suffering from mental illness will be negatively correlated with their negative attitudes about mental illness. Korcher and Penn believe that reducing negative attitudes is necessary in reducing the stigma of mental illness, and believe that the most promising way to reduce stigma was to implement interpersonal contact between those with mental illness and those